Well, who's Secretary of State? Trey Grayson is the Kentucky Secretary of State.
Well, he was the guy who was waiting out Jim Bunning, who, of course, is kind of a very old guy from Kentucky who was kind of senile and everyone wanted to kind of push aside. He very kind of politely waited his turn and waited for kind of Mitch McConnell's blessing. And, you know, Ron Paul's an ophthalmologist, not someone who was really on anyone's radar screen at all. So Grayson, although this has not been quite as negative a campaign as you might have in Pennsylvania, for example, probably feels a little upset that he thought, you know, he'd waited all this time for Bunning to retire. Now all of a sudden someone's going to kind of steal his thunder.
It's interesting when you look at Pennsylvania. On the one hand, people who haven't voted for, Democrats who haven't voted for a Republican for 30 years, so that's Arlen Specter. This is the first chance they'll be confronted with voting for him and might not do that.
That's right.
But lines break down because in the case in Pennsylvania, Specter was against the surge in Afghanistan. Joe Sestak is a three-star admiral, two-term congressman. He's for the surge.
That's right. I mean, if you look at the polling there, it's not such a clean kind of liberal versus moderate division. It's kind of all over the map, really. I mean, one thing about Sestak is that even though the blogs support him, that's a key kind of part of the constituency. You need more than that, too. You know, you need kind of conservative Democrats in Western Pennsylvania who are disillusioned with incumbent politicians in general. I'm sure he'll do actually pretty well with a lot of union voters, even though Sestak might have their endorsements, or Specter might. You know, Sestak, that's usually his constituency, and they're going to make up their own minds in a lot of cases.
In Kentucky, way under the radar is the Democratic primary that's also happening today. State Attorney General Jack Conway, Lieutenant Governor Dan Mangiardo, who went against Bunning and almost won.
And almost beat Bunning, but Conway seems to pull a bit better in the general election right now. He's also a bit more to Mangiardo's left, potentially. But that race is actually going to be closer, I think, than the Republican primary there. It's kind of fallen off the radar screen because people are so worried about Pennsylvania, where it's more dramatic, or Arkansas. That one is really too close to call for the most recent polling.
So talk about Arkansas. This is a different situation where it has to do with a runoff.
It's different. So one candidate has to get to 50% in Arkansas. It looks like neither one may. And the other complication in Arkansas is you haven't had any polls come out in about a week and a half. So we're a little bit in the dark. We don't know if Bill Halter has had a late surge like Joe Sestak did.
Governor.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania. But it looks like you have kind of crazy, dare I say, libertarian candidate there as well, who might take up 7 or 10% of the Democratic vote. And if that's the case, you're probably headed to a runoff like they have in a lot of different southern states.
Blanche Lincoln, talk about her positions, the incumbent senator.
Well, you know, Arlen Specter at least has shifted to the left over the course of the year. I mean, she really hasn't. She was kind of a thorn in the side of the public option, other parts of health care reform, did vote for it in the end, you know, was someone who withdrew their support for EFCA, as you mentioned before.
Some refer to her as Walmart senator.
Yeah, I mean, it's a state where the senators from Arkansas get about half their donations from PAC money, and a lot of that is Walmart in that state. You know, one problem the Democrats have is they have people who are kind of centrist, but they're not really populist so much, right? They're mostly kind of corporate-supported candidates. It's changing a little bit. If you look at like a John Tester in Montana, kind of the newer generation of Democrats is different. But this older generation, it's most people who are, you know, take a lot of corporate money, and that can be reflected sometimes in their politics, and that's what people are rebelling against. Not the fact that you're not going to have a super progressive Democrat from Arkansas, but maybe the way in which Lincoln is conservative is not really kind of reflecting her electorate so much as kind of her fundraising donor base, I suppose.
And Bill Halter, the lieutenant governor, has gotten a lot of support from unions, supports EFCA, the Employee Free Choice Act. Talk about his surge, and when would this runoff take place if Blanche Lincoln doesn't get the 50%? I'm
not sure the exact date of the runoff. I think it's in about 3 weeks from now. But I mean, there's already been about $8 million in independent expenditures in Arkansas, with the unions especially, where they really think that Blanche Lincoln pulled the rug out from EFCA, and that her kind of wavering support early on, back in kind of March of last year when Obama was still polling at 65%, is really kind of what undermined that initiative. And so there's a lot of, you know, people want a lot of revenge there. I would think the difference in Arkansas is that, unlike in Pennsylvania, you don't have kind of this big college-educated kind of white blog-reading Democratic base like you do in many other states, right? So even though the Netroots are involved and you have kind of national progressives involved, that's not a big share of the Arkansas electorate, which has a lot of African Americans, which is very kind of rural and working class. So it may be not quite enough, and so Halter would have to keep her below 50% tonight and then win the runoff in a few weeks.
Well, Nate Silver, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Of course, we will cover all of this tomorrow as well. Nate Silver, founder of the polling site 538.com. This is Democracy Now!